それではお時間になりましたので、
So we would like to get started with this session, the Breakout Round 1, concerning challenges to arms control and nuclear non-proliferation regimes. Originally, this session was to run until 5:30, but the schedule has been changed so that we are going to have our discussion until 6. I hope this would be a fruitful and lively discussion session. So this session is attended by 5 renowned speakers. First of all, the moderator is to be served by Professor Akiyama Nobumasa, Dean of the Graduate School of International and Public Policy of Hitotsubashi University. Seated next to him, we have Mr. Anton Khlopkov, Director of the Center for Energy and Security Studies, Dr. Brad Roberts, Director of the Center for Global Security Research of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and also Ambassador Yukio Satoh, Councilor and former President of JIIA and former Permanent Representative of Japan to the United Nations, and Professor Shen Dingli, Professor of the Institute of International Studies, Fudan University.
I'm still wondering if I should speak in Japanese or in English, and I asked Ambassador Sato, and he said he's going to speak in English. So maybe I feel a little bit obliged to speak in English too. So the title of this panel is Challenges to Arms Control and Non-Proliferation Regimes. So very sounds like a liberal, title. So the arms control regimes and non-proliferation regimes both are in our subject. And so I think probably for all of you, it's very clear that now those regimes are in challenge and they're facing the crisis of collapse. So this summer, the INF formally ceased to exist, and then so there will be no regulation on the category of medium-range missiles at this moment. So the INF was, in a sense, from the beginning of its history, very remarkable, the arms control treaty, which stipulated the abolishment of the all weapons in certain category. So that was very historic. Then now it has an end. Then on other regarding other treaties, including New START, they also face the problem and challenges. If there will be no agreement agreed by the Russia and the United States on the extension, then New START also will end on 2021. And furthermore, the ABM treaty was finished in the early 2000s. So that means the so-called strategic stability, which was supported by institutionalized mutual assured destruction, supported by those the various arms control treaties, are now maybe ending its history. I don't know whether it means that it will be the end of the role of arms control in the future, but certainly the existing framework of new arms control is now come to the end almost. And then the crisis on the strategic stability or stability in nuclear order is not limited in the bilateral relationship between United States and Russia. So now in East Asia, we see the big challenges, including the modernization and rapid build-up of the China's nuclear arsenal, as well as anti-access area denial capabilities. Then also North Korean nuclear capability is steadily, being built up, including the the sophistication of missile launch technologies. And then, if we look further beyond our region, there is Iran nuclear program, and the JCPOA faces a big challenge as well. And that is a topic which is being currently discussed in another panel, which actually I wanted to participate, in fact. But anyway, so non-proliferation regime, as well as arms control regimes, are kind of facing big challenges, various challenges. So, but still, ironically, those crises reminded us the importance of thinking about how we are going to govern the nuclear weapons in the international community. But this task is not easy, along with several new challenges. So now we see the rapid progress in so-called emerging technologies, such as cyber, satellite, artificial intelligence, and furthermore, the hypersonic glide vehicle. So these new technology may affect the calculation on strategic stability, particularly how the non-nuclear strategic capabilities, such as hypersonic glide vehicle, may affect the definition of the strategic stability and design of the escalation ladder. And further, the crisis management is probably required new thinking as well. So, but on the other hand, we see different trend. So 2017, at the meeting in the United Nations, the 122 countries voted for the adoption of the so-called nuclear ban treaty. So now 33 countries ratified, and 17 countries for the entry into force of the treaty. And then for the Japanese, we had a very important event last few weeks ago. The Pope Francis visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki and sent a very clear message to the international community to requesting the ban, not only the use of nuclear weapons or the deterrence by nuclear weapons, but even the possession of nuclear weapons. So, and these events, the adoption of a ban treaty, the Pope Francis, the comments on the nuclear weapons, actually further energized the movement to abolish nuclear weapons. So it seems that we are living in a kind of parallel world, right? One to promote the nuclear disarmament. The other is, we are rethinking the role of nuclear weapons. And actually, recently I published a book with my colleague. Maybe I should identify myself as pacifist, and the other is more kind of a hawkish guy. And two of us published a book so-called The End of Nuclear Forgetting. So that means after the Cold War, in a very optimistic environment, we tend to forget about the role of nuclear weapons. We try to, we are working to reduce the role of nuclear weapons. I hope that trend was not dead, but now many nuclear armed states and also nuclear countries under nuclear extended deterrence are forced to rethink what will be the appropriate role of nuclear weapons. So it seems like to me there is a kind of parallel world. So the purpose of this panel is first how we should understand the the current situation regarding so-called the nuclear order, global nuclear order. Then second, where are we going from here? And what sort of a nuclear order are we able to establish if it's possible? And if not possible, then what happens, right? So then if we are to have another modality of nuclear order, nuclear stability, then what are the challenges ahead of us? So we are talking about these three questions. And then I hope that this panel will be more interactive among the panelists, as well as with the you or who participate in this the room. So unlike the president, I would like to ask each panelist to have a relatively quick first intervention, maybe 5 minutes, on, for example, where we are. So is the U.S.-Russia nuclear arms control collapsing? If so, why is it? If not, how should we understand the current situation? That's mostly addressed. Maybe ask you to, Anton and Brad to respond. And what about what's the Chinese view on the current the nuclear arms control or even possible arms race? That's for the Dingli. And for Ambassador Satoh, I would like to pose you a little bit rather difficult question. So, is the risk of nuclear war rising? Intentionally and unintentionally, and then does nuclear deterrence work effectively now for nuclear armed states as well as for the allies of the nuclear armed states? So with this, so Anton, you're the first.
Thank you, Nobu. Thank you, Nobu. It's a pleasure and honor to be at this stage and speak on the future of arms control, if there is any. Because, Nobu, I'm very much with you where we are today. I do believe that arms control architecture, which was designed during the last decades, has been almost dismantled during the recent years. And our chair already mentioned ABM Treaty, INF, and my understanding that chances to extend New START Treaty for the 5 years are quite low. I should also mention here, though we agreed to focus more on arms control rather than non-proliferation regime during this panel on suggestion of our chair, I would like to mention that non-proliferation regime also face significant challenges. Next year we will have the NPT review conference, which quite likely will be the second in the row with no joint final document. First time, 2 conferences in a row, first time in the history. And this is especially challenging since it will be, next year will be the 50th anniversary of entry treaty into force. And of course, I should also mention here what is happening with JCPOA. Because my personal view was and is, this deal was not perfect, but it is the art of diplomacy, of multinational diplomacy. Probably it was the biggest success of the non-proliferation regime for the last 2 or 3 decades, and unilateral decision by one of the parties of the deal, which is the United States, apply a lot of pressure, not only on the deal itself, but on other parties which continue implementation of their commitment. So again, the non-proliferation regime is in the deep crisis. Having said that, I would like to return to the arms control where we are. I already mentioned the architecture of arms control has been almost dismantled. In addition to that, what makes me concerned, there is no regular dialogue on the future of arms control, not only in trilateral format as this US administration is proposed, or in P5 format, but there is no regular dialogue between Moscow and Washington nowadays. In the past, and by the way, even during the Cold War, there were regular exchanges. For the last 3 years, there were just 2 meetings on strategic stability, just 2. And if we are serious about New START extension, if we are serious about new possible mechanism or measures, of course, dialogue is critically important. So lack of dialogue makes me even more pessimistic what we can have within the next few years. In addition to that, and this is my next point, my view, and if I'm wrong, Brad and other colleagues in the room will correct me, my view that there is no clear policy of this US administration in the field of arms control. Probably except CTBT, which is part of non-proliferation regime. And this policy is quite unfortunate, as most of you know, and I should mention it, that US made it clear that this administration is not going to seek ratification of the treaty, which is quite unfortunate. Next, and I would like to particularly make this comment here in Tokyo, my feeling, my assessment that other countries which security, national security, is affected by these negative developments in arms control are quite passive, including, I would say, Japan. Because if some media reports are correct that there are some very preliminary discussions about deployment of INF-related missiles in Japan in the future between Japan and US, if this is true, then Japan should share responsibility for the death of the treaty. I hope this is not the case, but my view that countries which security is affected by negative developments in arms control should be more active. It's about countries in Asia, it's about countries in Europe as well. For example, Russia proposed a moratorium on deployment of INF-related missiles. I have not heard many positive reactions from European countries or Asian countries. So having said that, there is a significant risk that arms control architecture will cease to exist early 2021 in the form which we know that. There are slight chances, I think, especially if we will have, not we, but the US will have democratic president after the November 2020 election, we will have a few weeks to extend that. But I am becoming more and more skeptical with regard to the future of New START under the current US administration. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much. So, Brad.
Thank you, Nobu. Thank you to our host for the opportunity to join this discussion and this distinguished panel. I want to pick up on the verb collapse, which creates the impression that everything's been running along fine until we hit some big problems in the current moment. What we're seeing is the gradual erosion and increasing irrelevance of the arms control structure that was created for a bipolar world defined by the nuclear confrontation. We've moved into a more multipolar world with more complex strategic relationships for both Russia and the United States. And we've moved into a world where the nuclear problem remains, but there are a lot of other problems in the strategic domain. So Russia's choice, well, America's choice to respond to a more multipolar world was to put an emphasis on defense. And as you know, our bilateral alliance attaches a significant value to ballistic missile defense in meeting the challenge from North Korea. Russia put a bet on offense as opposed to defense and developed regional strike capabilities, nuclear and non-nuclear, for the purpose of bolstering its defense against actors around its periphery. And so we've both been adapting to a more multipolar environment. We've adopted different ideas about strategic stability for this environment. The idea that strategic stability should be built on mutual assured destruction does not fit our idea of strategic stability with North Korea. We don't want a relationship of mutual assured destruction with North Korea. We don't see that as likely to be stable. So our thinking about the requirements of stability has changed. And our thinking about the new technologies has crowded into our thinking about nuclear stability. And we haven't found many good ideas yet to understand the impact of competition in cyberspace, in outer space, in hypersonics, in missile defenses, et cetera, on our traditional concepts. And arms control has not readily adapted to this new, more multi-domain strategic competition. As we think about steps going forward and what regime might be possible next, we have to consider this more complex environment. We also have to consider the pathway that got us to this point, which is to say it will be very difficult for the United States Senate to offer its support to an arms control treaty with Russia, a future arms control treaty, based on the record of Russian noncompliance with not just INF. And let's recall the statements from President Putin in 2008 and again in 2013 that the arms control agreements of the 1980s and 1990s were imposed upon Russia as at a moment of its weakness in order to keep Russia weak as a part of a strategy of containing its return to a prominent place in the international system. But instead of declaring, as he might have done under treaty law, that the treaties no longer served Russia's purpose, he chose instead to, with the exception of CFE, but INF, open skies, the Helsinki Accords, the Budapest Memorandum, the Vienna documents, all of these elements of the European arms control regime and arms restraint regime were simply ignored. And this has a legacy in terms of our ability. We might possibly, with good creative work, come up with a new understanding for some bilateral or trilateral or multilateral arms control regime that would serve everybody's interests. But getting it supported by our Congress and by the other parliaments that would have to ratify it if there were other parties is complicated by this poisonous effect of the choice that President Putin made to remain within the treaties but violate them from inside. Let me stop there.
Thank you. In fact, I maybe asked Dingli first and then maybe lastly Ambassador Satoh, just in order. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the organizer for inviting me. Let me address non-proliferation first, then I will address arms control. To better case of non-proliferation, one Iran and the other DPRK. Actually, nobody liked JCPOA. Those conservatives think it has left too big a loophole that would allow Iran to take advantage of it. And that's the reason why the Trump administration would abandon, would quit. Trump's idea is that a bad paper is even worse than having a no paper. So this is bad. Why I have it? But the key is, with this paper, Iran is willing to restrain its nuclear program to a certain level, but be permitted with certain freedom of so-called freedom, nuclear use for a peaceful purpose. Who knows it's for peaceful or non-peaceful? But let us observe, inspect, challenge it, and they are willing to accept. So this kind of deterrence possibly could keep that country to have the maximum chance to have a significant nuclear breach. it does have a chance, probably minus than 1%. So President Obama's idea is that a good paper is better than no paper. But Trump's idea is that as long as it is not 100%, it's a bad paper. Then it's worse than having no paper. So different philosophy is at play. Each makes sense. But for each philosophy that has a weakness, I like Obama's philosophy. Take a limited risk, but minimize the threat. And that's the reason why DPRK feels very unsatisfied. Why they are not allowed to have such a freedom. They want to keep a certain freedom of peaceful use of nuclear energy for uranium within limited enrichment level. Why they are not allowed? They have to be to abandon all such operation in order to be treated as a normal country. So the world is treating different proliferant with different approach. No common standard. Even if we have UN Security Council resolution to say Iran should have zero operation, but the P5 plus Germany violated any UN Security Council resolution to say, well, you don't need to observe UN Security Council resolution. We give you certain benefit. But for North Korea, you have to observe all UN Security Council resolution. No leeway. So this is diplomacy. We succeeded for a while for Iran. But who knows, this would not carry a time bomb at the future. But for North Korea, the time is now. It has exploded 6 nuclear detonation. To say, I have the freedom of sovereignty of nuclear weapon possession. So what? Fury and fire. 2, I fall in love with him. My good friend, Robert, has just said no way for North Korea to stand with the U.S. on equal footing for mutually assured destruction. But they don't need to have the equal destruction. They want to have a non-zero possibility to threat to the U.S. Eventually, that approach has worked. So, Singapore meeting and Hanoi meeting, they agreed that North Korea should abandon nuclear weapon. They agreed that they need to work out a roadmap toward the final realization of this abandonment. They agree that North Korea's good behavior should be rewarded. But they don't agree what constitutes a roadmap and how to reward. So I see that the North Korea's proliferation case shows the UN system has not worked. But the US-North Korean bilateral system is working, but not to success. With 2 meetings, possibly sometime later, the 2 leaders would have 3rd meeting. North Korean leader would come better prepared. US has intelligence, has satellite. They know where North Korea is cheating the US. And they know US would demand to verify all, to abandon all. Either no meeting or meeting with preparedness to abandon all, or to abandon with a good return. So I'm not totally in despair. I am hopeful. Now they know their problem. North Korea, are you genuine to abandon for good return? Or the US has enough time for this administration to get a Nobel Peace Prize, to get a substantial nuclear disarmament within 1 year. It may not have time. So if it really want to have something good, it has to draw the same lesson as President Trump is drawing vis-a-vis China on trade war. China's idea is that we have a bigger trade dispute. This has a deeper root. Can we negotiate in phased program and to cut the phased deal? The same Trump said, no. A bad deal is worse than to have no deal. Now he said, any incremental deal is better than to have no deal. He is counting down on his remaining days. He needs a deal. So probably some good thing would happen. China-US will get a deal sometime next year. That may not save President Trump, but who knows? That may not push those swing constituents back to him next November. So North Korea is still hopeful. Iran not completely unhopeful. Despite the U.S. unilateral withdrawal from the JCPOA, Russia and China are still there. We work with Germany, France, and the UK to keep Iran there. Iran is leaving with 3 programs already, but it has not announced to completely to withdraw. So if the U.S. is unwilling to play the leadership, Russia and China, Germany, France, and UK would replace the U.S. to play alternative leadership. Not one country leadership, but P4+1. But a future U.S. government may return to be progressive, to be cooperative, and may rejoin JCPOA. As Trump said, if the term of Paris Climate Change Accord would be renegotiated, he may return. And he would return to TPP, now it's called the JCTPP, for the new term he would make. So let me turn to arms control, the term. His term is that zero weakness, zero defect. Look, INF, Russia is bypassing. So why US need to stay? So Russia need to display its sincerity to meet the US satisfaction. Russia think has already been very sincere, inviting US to observe the Russians' missile test. But if the US is willing to leave, fine, Russia can still live with this. And open sky. Russian side can inspect US space. But US no longer needs that. US has very good high-resolution satellite imagery. So US no longer need it. For Russia to have a good benefit that the US does not need to use the same technology to get. So US is not considerate. Not all nations are equal. Not all nations have the same technology. Russia may not have the same technology as it used to have before, but who knows, Russia may not have better technology later. So US seem to make open sky trembling. Be prepared. US would quit. US quit. INF, open sky, and now seems to be uninterested in extending New START, cut in 2010 for another 5 years. I'm a bit worried if US would not extend, which means they would regain their sovereignty to develop their own nuclear weapon program unilaterally and without a restraint. I hope our Russian friend would not. But if the US would have a new president, or another Congress that would not allow the US White House to spend lots of money to build lots of unnecessary nuclear weapons, we still have a chance by choosing a right US leader a year later. And the current treaty would expire next year or 2 years later. And the U.S. move to leave Paris Climate Change Accord would be effective after the first term of Trump administration, if he would have the second. But what if he would not have a second? 1 minute. The next U.S. government would say the motion is withdrawn. U.S. would stay inside the accord. So this 4 year of negative development may make many U.S. lawmaker establishment, deep state, to think they want to have a more cooperative security through making concession to others, and then others would be cooperative to make their own concession to U.S. And then New START would be New START for another 10 years. By 2030, and at that time, maybe some of the mid-nuclear weapon power, if they build more, U.S. and Russia would reduce less, and they meet in the middle way, and then we would have a multilateral system. So when the future is dim, I still keep hope for a cooperative arms control and a non-proliferation future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, Dingli, you have already spoken on the topic of next round of discussion, and also, right. So let me gently remind you that I think the strategic stability and arms control are based on the compliance and observance of norms. So I hope that panel follow the same rule. So Ambassador Satoh, thank you for.
Thank you very much. Since I was once the president of the JIIA, I want to thank the panelists to join us on this commemorative occasion. And I also, I'm grateful for the JIIA itself for inviting me to this. And as I look the oldest among us, I just want to bring back the debates, or at least suggest some kind of historical perspective. The INF itself, it is indeed the abrogation of the INF Treaty itself testifies or signifies a significant setback for the cause of arms control and nuclear disarmament. But I have to say that the abrogation of the INF Treaty has far less impact on the Indo-Pacific than Euro-Atlantic region, because it is outside the framework of the INF Treaty that the new post-Cold War risks have been occurring in the Indo-Pacific. That's the first point I want to say. And also the second point I would suggest is that point out that the negotiation, the process of INF negotiations demonstrated the differences between the US allies, those in Europe and those in Asia, particularly Japan. The Europeans, particularly in the context of ensuring the credibility of US extended deterrence, the Europeans all knew at that time that they wanted to have a deployment of US nuclear missile weapons within Europe in order to ensure the credibility of the US extended deterrence. While South Korea was having a US accepted deployment of nuclear weapons during the Cold War, but Japan refused to accept the deployment or even the entry of nuclear weapons into Japan. Therefore, this INF negotiation itself underscored the differences between the European allies and Japan in their approach to ensure the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. By the way, at that time I recall that the Japanese government argued with regard to the credibility, or with regard to ensure the way to ensure the credibility of the U.S. extended deterrence. Tokyo argued that so long as U.S.-Soviet mutual deterrence would be kept globally, the effect of the U.S. deterrence would cover Japan. That is the kind. Japan has to make such kind of argument in order to make the dependence upon U.S. extended deterrence compatible with the non-nuclear policy. The third, following these 2 points, I would like to argue that it is increasingly important to see the differences between the geopolitical and the strategic conditions between Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. And NATO, of course, both the two regions, strategic environments have been now affected by the development of technologies and also the expansion of strategic dimensions to include space, cyber, and electromagnetic spectrum, according to the Defense Agency. But anyway, in these three dimensions, we share, both sides, Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic share the increased risk. But NATO strategy is basically land-based and Russia-focused, while the future the security, particularly U.S.-Japan alliance, would be very much sea-based and China-focused. So what I want to say is that to try to tailor or apply the NATO concepts and jargons to the Indo-Pacific would not suffice to meet the regional security or strategic requirements. Having said that, responding to Akiyama-san's question, if the nuclear risk is increasing, yes, for two reasons. One, the nuclear weapon states have been strengthening their own nuclear capabilities as a reality. And the second, the non-proliferation hasn't been stopped, particularly in the case of North Korea. So to your question about risk, I have to say yes, risk is increasing. But another point is that whether the nuclear deterrence, whether it be working or not. By the way, I have to point out again that it is very difficult to discuss about nuclear deterrence rationally or, well, it's rationally, because after all, the credibility of nuclear deterrence is a matter of perception. Even deterrence itself is a matter of perception. Therefore, it's very difficult to discuss this issue. Having said that, I would say, but to your question, my answer at this moment, yes, it's working so far. Although the strategic environments surrounding the concept of nuclear strategy, concept of nuclear deterrence, is more and more becoming complicated. So that is my answer. And I want to support, although seemingly in a different context, but the arguments made by Russian and Chinese co-panelists here. Yes, non-proliferation is very important. And I don't trust North Korea, by the way, because it's in history. You know, North Korea has broken its commitment to denuclearization already 3 times. Once with South Korea in 1991 or something, and once with the United States, right at the time of the Clinton administration, and within the 6-party talks, which China was leading. So this is having said that, I think it's because of that the efforts should be increased to prevent the proliferation further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have very interesting, fascinating introductory remarks by 4 panelists. And let me pick up a couple of points that I would like to further dig into. One, some pointed out the chance of extension of a New START is pretty much low. And then if the New START will cease to exist, then how would it affect the relationship between the United States and Russia? And also, as introduced in the plenary, the U.S. Senate kind of passed a resolution that without involvement of China, it is difficult to support this extension. I'm just a New START, the follow-on treaty. Then what happens that, given that there may be chance that China is going to join in the sort of next round of the arms control negotiation, it's not unlikely. So then what happened when the New START ceased to exist? That's anybody, if you'd like to respond. This is one. And also, in fact, personally, what Ambassador Satoh said about the question of rationality of deterrence, it's very interesting, particularly given that the emerging technology may affect the calculation strategic stability, and also, as I said, the A2AD and other conventional conventional strategic capabilities also would affect the calculation escalations. So, if some of you could respond to this question about the question of rationality of deterrence, and also given that the trust between the United States and Russia is now decreasing without the significant sort of frequency of dialogue, strategic dialogue. So how would you be able to control the sort of such a risk of lack of credibility or trust and rationality, or understanding on the rationality on both sides and deterrence? And finally, Dingli, I'd like to ask you to explain more about China's position on the INF and also, maybe the New START, the crisis. So, anyone can volunteer? Okay.
Before I will answer, Nobu, to your question, is my understanding correct that we will discuss at a later stage where we're going from now? Okay. Again, first, I'm not going to react to what just Brad said, because, Brad, I hope that you believe yourself in so many non-compliance accusations of Russia, which you just made. Again, I think we are here to, at least I hope, we are here to focus more what should be and what could be done in this very negative environment and the situation which we face. So having said that, with regard New START, I think New START extension, the good news that neither US Senate nor Russian Duma has to ratify extension. So from that point of view, if there would be political will in both capitals, I hope that it could be done. Again, as I mentioned, my view that the chances are low, but we still have some. We still have some. And where I agree with Brad, I think we do need time, more time, to think how the future of arms control, if there would be any, should look like. This is why we do need, I think, New START extension. First. Second, with regard post-New START, I think China made it clear that it is not going to be a part of this kind of treaty or discussion. And I think it could be more appropriate to try to discuss related issues in P5 format. Again, unfortunately, this format was not very much productive during the recent years. But if we are serious about expanding the format, I think this could be more appropriate, more useful than just to speak about Russia, China, US.
Sorry, can I just clarify that the P5 format which you're talking about is within the NPT framework or beyond that, outside of NPT? Because now in the NPT framework, there is a discussion going on for example, on the sort of groceries and other.
No, I mean, well, grocery is good, but it does not cut nukes. I mean, so my point that if there is a political will to go beyond New START, and there is a political will in other countries to join this discussion, P5 format could be probably the most appropriate to start this discussion. It does not mean that the steps by all P5 countries should be exactly the same, because the numbers are quite different. But other countries should indicate their readiness to be involved.
Comment on 2 points. First, on the argument that bringing a Democrat back to the White House will make all the difference on the future of arms control. I worked for a Democratic president. It was my great pleasure and honor to play an important role in making nuclear policy in the Obama administration. And we tried very hard to get an arms control deal, a follow-on to New START, that would go slightly deeper in reductions. We tried very hard to deal with the non-compliance issues. There were 30 meetings or more at senior levels with Russian government officials on these questions. And while I'm in favor of New START extension, the consequence will be that it lets everybody who's interested in this question off the hook of the real hard next question, which is, what do we do for arms control after the bilateral U.S.-Russian process has gone as deep as it can go in the current security environment? And the arms control community is desperate for a sign that New START will be extended and that we'll keep going down that pathway. The world isn't going down that pathway. Yes, we should extend New START. We should buy the time. We should relearn the habits of cooperation and debate and discussion on these things, because we've fallen out of those habits. But the world has moved on, and we're not going to keep recreating something that we had from the past. So this leads me to your question, Nobu, about what if no START? What if no arms control? Well, the common fear is, my God, we're back to the arms race. It'll be just like the 1950s and 1960s. I don't think so. Is the United States interested in seeking nuclear superiority quantitatively, jumping out back to 30,000 nuclear weapons? No. Is Russia? No. Is China? No. So, an arms race? Well, things aren't going to remain static. There will be an arms walk or an arms jog. We'll each be more competitive somehow. Equally possible, from my perspective, is that the United States chooses to spend less on nuclear weapons. I'm a fan of U.S. nuclear modernization. We're following Russian nuclear modernization by roughly a decade. If we don't modernize, we're going to age out parts of the force, just unilaterally disarm. But the reality is the best possible outcome for a guy like me favoring nuclear modernization by the U.S. is that by the year 2030, we will have slightly fewer nuclear weapons than we do now, deployed nuclear weapons, because the submarine force will have shrunk. More likely is that we're going to spend less on nuclear modernization. We're not going to spend more. Russia's not going to spend more on nuclear modernization. It's already cutting its budget. So it's not obvious, if I've made my point, it's not obvious to me that an arms race is what comes next. What comes next is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of hedging and a lot of frustration and hopefully a lot of dialogue and new approaches.
Thank you. Dingli?
You asked a question about China's view on INF and New START. I don't need our embassy people to point out that I'm not a government person. I'm a professor of university, so I do not represent our foreign ministry and the embassy. Crystal clear. If I cannot represent my university, I speak on my own. My heart is, let's join arms control to help the world to reduce nuclear weapon. But my brain would say, wait a minute, how many we have? Are we qualified to disarm? When I was a student 30 years ago at Princeton, I learned from literature, open literature, Western literature. China had some 20 strategic nuclear weapons and some 200 total nuclear weapons. China never published this data. Even today, people say our Prime Minister, Li Keqiang, may not know because he is not a member of the military commission. Maybe very few people would know. So if I don't know what I can do, assuming we have 200 in total, and mostly INF, 10% of them strategic NF. And when New START would restrain US and Russia to reduce to as low as a countable weapon at 1,550, based on 800 platforms. They have 1,500. You have 200. So we do not qualify to participate in the immediate next step, multilateral negotiation. But I do not know if after 30 years this is still the case. Or from beginning, the Western data was not accurate. I do not know. My government never let me to know. If at a certain point I would say, I know, don't trust me. So we don't know. But this time, Chinese government staged 16 DF-5B, 16 DF-41, 16 DF-31. If each of them would carry only one nuclear warhead, they are 48 weapons. If each of them carry 3, they are more than 100. And China probably have one more times of such a system, which has not been brought to military parade. So I have my embodied estimate, China may have more weapons than the Western literature reviewed 30 years ago. But how many? I still don't know. So this is something that Robert has said, new environment. China does not let us know how many they have. What if they have 1,000? then you would be very reluctant to new start to follow on. Reducing from 1,500 to go down, you would be reluctant. But what if this is true? China only has 300. So US and Russia need to do a little more. What I would suggest is that let's engage to help improve international relations, building trust. Before trust, you think China may have more. We think in addition to what you already have, you have many in reserve. They have not been dismantled. They can be put into active operational service anytime soon. So we are very reluctant to participate in any multilateral talk prematurely. So this kind of distrust, lack of transparency, may make a future new start to follow on difficult. INF. China may have lots of IF, intermediate range system. And they may be conventional and nuclear dual capable. But who knows? Because China does not let us to see. Say if they are nuclear incapable, then they would be viewed as not INF. If China has a lot of non-IF, America would not feel comfortable, but at least this would not be a part of the system that would be touched for any future multilateral INF talk. So with the unfortunate collapse of INF, US and Russia would retain their sovereign right freely to do their land-based INF. And China may feel more threat. They would build more nuclear INF. So I need to do more. But they would already feel threatened. What if this Chinese intermediate range force is dual capable? Then they feel very much upset. Talk. China may offer certain transparency to show these are only nuclear, conventional mode, no nuclear mode. A bit of transparency to make our American and Russian friend feel peaceful. And they may re-engage to have a modern INF 2.0. That would take care Americans, certain American security concern, while still allow Russia to test some of the system not to violate the definition of new INF. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ambassador Satoh, you are actually one of the core members when Japan was trying to reflect Japan's interest in a negotiation on the INF treaty. So you had a really good experience how Japan should identify the priorities in arms control particularly. And then, so what your experience tells us in thinking about the sort of current situation with the absence of INF, particularly in the Asian security context. And then maybe if you could propose some sort of possible way of discussing on the prospects.
Well, I have to correct you, first of all. I was not directly involved in negotiations. I had been involved in many different positions to watch. And of course, I had some occasion to have my own say in our own policy, but I was not so deeply involved in negotiations. Having said that, I feel very uncomfortable to use the word the intermediary range nuclear forces. I mean, because it's very much based upon the U.S.-Soviet, the U.S.-Soviet strategic relations at that time. Intermediate range is a word created for intermediate range nuclear forces was created for a number of reasons. For example, to include cruise missile, or to cover what shall I say, to counter the SS-20, Soviet at that time SS-20 missiles. So the NATO and the European European countries do have their own history and the legacy of INF Treaty. But as I pointed out at the outset, that insecurity in this region has been occurring outside the framework of the INF Treaty. China, of course, has developed medium range or strategic ICBM medium range missiles, or those equivalent to the intermediate range missiles in NATO. But China was out of the INF Treaty. And we have to accept the differences between the strategic environment between the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific. And also, as it is well known, that non-nuclear missiles in the hand of China, like what's so-called carrier killer, would be a big challenge to the U.S. force operations in the Western Pacific, challenging the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. So we have to, from my own past experiences, I just want to say that we had better address the issues in the Indo-Pacific anew, from a fresh point of view, on the basis of reality.
Thank you very much. So now maybe it's time to think about what would be the next step. What happens next? And drawing from some of your remarks, I got to yeah, sure.
Listening to the other panelists' argument, I am of the view that it's more, given that China is very skeptical about the arms control regime of the present time, I think it's far more realistic for us to expect or ask the United States and Russia to be engaged the dialogue to do what after the termination, the limits of the current New START. At the same time, for the United States and China, I want to urge them to discuss more about how to ensure denuclearization of North Korea. And this kind of discussion would help generate a kind of mutual understanding about strategic issues between the United States and China. And that would be of some help. I might be a bit too optimistic, but I thought that kind of first step on regional security between Washington and Beijing would help create a ground for the future so-called trilateral or G5 P5 strategic dialogues. I think it's a bit far-fetched to expect that China will join in the process of thinking about what to do with the current New START. After all, it is well known that the United States and Russia, between them, possess about 90% of the nuclear weapons. So to the cause of the nuclear disarmament, I think the two nuclear superpowers have a special responsibilities.
Thank you. So that is a good lead to the next round. That is about where are we going from now and this place, and what are the challenges. So I thought about two different types of questions. One is what sort of actions should each country or the countries collectively take. The other is what sort of concepts or modalities of arms control should we be thinking of? I know in particular, on the second question, now the stakeholders will be inevitably multilateralized, involving the China and other nuclear armed states other than United States and the Russia. And maybe Anton said P5, but from Chinese perspective, maybe India is more relevant if they are going to discuss on its stability. And then, so what sort of actions should we take? And then if we are going to multilateralize, plus we have A2AD capabilities, cyber, satellite, and those poses vulnerability to the strategic stability as well. So what sort of modalities, what kind of items should be included in arms control, next round of arms control dialogue? But of course, these are the big subject for the discussion bit of the governmental level. But if you could share your thoughts on those two things, that would be, maybe interesting and maybe stimulating their thoughts as well. So if anyone could start.
Yeah, first, before I forget, I would like to ask the question to Ambassador Satoh. And Ambassador, when you have the floor next time, if you would react, I would appreciate that. Because you referred a number of times what Russia, US, China could do. How you see the role of Japan in the future of arms control? Because you're an umbrella state. You do have alliance with the United States. And again, I think it's really important, not only with regard to Japan, but other umbrella states to be active, to deliver messages and to make some steps. With regard what is next, I think first of all, political will is needed. I don't think that nowadays we do have it. Whatever countries are involved, we do need political will to reach progress and to address those nuclear challenges which we will face when those discussions will start. Next, Ambassador Fahmy earlier today said we need diplomacy, and I said dialogue. We don't have regular dialogue nowadays in bilateral format, trilateral format, or in the P5 format. We do need regular dialogue where diplomats are involved, defense experts, officials are involved, and all key agencies from each side are involved. Because if there is no dialogue, nothing will happen. And I mean, a few recent examples. If GCPOA is bad before kill it, we do need to negotiate something better. And it did not happen, unfortunately. So we do need a dialogue. Next issue, how to make those new deals sustainable. Because as Timon Brial mentioned today, after a series of withdrawals, of course a big question how reliable your negotiating partner is, how credible your partner is with whom you negotiate. Because back to GCPOA experience, I mean, let's imagine that Russia and other countries negotiated this deal with US, and nowadays our countries could be sanctioned for implementation exactly what we negotiated with the United States because the change in the United States. And here, I mean, my next point, again, I don't know how to address it. It's about Brad. the domestic divide in the U.S., I think, affect more and more related issues, arms control, non-proliferation. I don't know how to address that, if there is a kind of silver bullet, if there is any new agreement or deal, how to get support from both parties to make it more sustainable. Of course, the arms control and non-proliferation, if we are serious about progress in the field of arms control and strengthening the non-proliferation regime, it should be prioritized in the foreign policy agenda. As, for example, was done during the Obama administration, the nuclear security. It was prioritized. A lot of political investments have been made and some progress, important progress have been achieved. So we do need those issues to be prioritized. Of course, not only in the States, in the United States, but in all countries involved. And the same true with regard alliance states. Next, this area of cooperation should be secure from impact of disagreements in other area. So to delink dialogue on arms control as much as possible and non-proliferation from other issues. And GCPOA was a very good example when, despite of disagreements on Syria, Ukraine, many other issues, P5+1 countries worked together and quite efficiently. Another similar example, removal and destroy of declared chemical weapons from Syria, when despite of many disagreements about the future of Syria, about other issues, Russia, US, and a number of other countries working together quite efficiently to reach the goal. So this kind of principle, I think we should follow if we are serious about future progress. With regard to the format, well, I still think a lot of work to be done with this regard. And this is where think tanks should contribute. President Sasai, in his introductory remarks, welcome remarks this morning, mentioned that Japan Institute of International Affairs would like to be more active. And I think it's, in principle, this is the time when think tanks must step in and provide their expertise to generate new creative ideas, because the situation is really dramatic. The crisis is very deep. And next, think tanks could provide sometimes back channel for discussion, informal exchanges, and this is what is badly needed nowadays when the channels of communication on those issues are quite limited.
Thank you. Now, Director Nakayama is here, so I'm sure he's listening to what Anton said. Thank you.
I could stop and just say I align myself with everything Anton said. I think we see this in very much the same way. I'm sure this is on. Now it's on. We're very much aligned in our thinking about all of those points, but let me add a couple of other arguments. From my point of view, the best case going forward is that we have three presidents who have said peace through strength, which isn't just about strength, it's also about peace. Meaning we have three presidents of the United States, Russia, and China who have made a commitment to improving the peace, but from a position of strength. Well, we'll find out if there's the political will to build on the new foundations that they've put in place. If there's a best case, it's that we will extend New START, and in the period of New START extension, we will find a follow-on agreement that will last another 10 or 15 years. My guess would be that that would not involve further reductions, but would involve preservation of the existing verification and compliance mechanisms. And if we were really to dream a little bit, we could ask the other P5 states, China, Britain, and France, to join as observers and participate in the verification process. This is the best case, and it's built on the peace through strength strategies the three leaders have offered. And we've been scared a little bit by the prospect of the end of arms control and the risk of increased competition and arms race. So maybe. We shouldn't rule out the best case. But I'm not optimistic on this. As our strategic relationships become more complex with the introduction of hypersonic systems, cyberspace, competition in outer space, the non-nuclear strike capabilities that Russia and China have deployed and the United States is seriously pursuing, it's becoming harder and harder, not easier and easier, to find some magical balance where we all say, yeah, that's stable. Moreover, in all of those, well, let me step back. When did arms control become possible in the Cold War? It was when the two sides concluded that they really had no benefit to gain in further competition. They had exhausted their ability to gain because the other side was equally capable of competing. We have not reached that point in cyberspace, nor in outer space, nor in hypersonics, nor in missile defense, etc. Moreover, I'm pessimistic because it's very clear that Russia and China will not come back to the negotiating table in the absence of a serious commitment from the United States to limits on missile defense. And the United States has said that we are pursuing missile defense of the homeland that's limited in character and purpose, aimed at negating the deterrence of states like North Korea and Iran. But the Trump administration struck the word limited. And now we have opened the question for Beijing and Moscow of whether what they've said they fear all along is now actually something really to fear, that the U.S. will build a missile defense aimed at negating their deterrence. So I think we need New START extension because we got a lot of hard things to think through and disagree about. But again, let me answer the other part of the question, which is while we're working this new set of problems, what's going to be happening to our strategic relationships? Are we going to be arms racing? And here we will be competing. The most important thing to do for strategic stability is to have confidence in your own deterrent. Russia and China concluded a decade ago, their leaders concluded that they lacked the confidence in their deterrence and needed to take steps to strengthen their deterrence posture. And they believe they have rebuilt an element of stability that was missing 10, 15, 20 years ago. We're going to face the same kind of discussion, whether we can maintain a credible, safe, and effective deterrent, nuclear and otherwise, amidst this very dynamic set of developments.
Thank you. So, Dingli?
What we can do next step? Not just a talk, dialogue, but also action. We need to do. But to do pragmatically. What we can do? Appreciating North Korea for having virtually stopped nuclear weapon testing and the testing of long-range missile. I don't think they run out of money to test. They want to invest through not to test to get something. And indeed, they get something from China. More talk from China. But if China just talk without giving them something, they would be fed off. And they have met with US President 2 times. The demand is that you have to clear all stuff before getting any return. they lose interest. So we should change our mindset. Get something, give something. It's not I get all, and then you give all, then you get all. The risk is too big. I agree with Ambassador Satoh. North Korea has not lived up to its word multiple times. But many of us did this before. So let's find merit of North Korea, not just dismerit. They have not tested nuclear weapon for 2 years. It's a merit. So Chinese leader met with them 5 times in 15 months. Almost every 3 months, we meet 1 time. That's too frequent. That made the US president feel suspicious. What are you talking about? After each talk, debrief with the US. Delete the most sensitive word, give them a description of the talk. To tell US we are not making airlines to hurt you. And we live up to our commitment to various UN Security Council resolution. But we think your approach, getting a beautiful agreement, North Korea give everything, after that the US would give something, is not pragmatic. So we think our approach is also not perfect, but may attract North Korea to do more. So roadmap phase 1, since they have asked them to make a 2 moratorium, you commit politically, legally, not to test. But of course you can return. Then we would give you something. For the 10 UN Security Council resolution sanction, we lift 3. So the humanitarian sanction, we lift. So tell us, how many nuclear weapons you have? They must lie. Don't tell all. They must secretly build something. So we need to tell them compromise is, you may not tell us all, but you need to tell us something. Abandon 50%. And we have the right to inspect. You have the right not to tell us everything. Give you 3 years, you abandon 10. Then we lift another 4 UN Security Council resolution. So last 10, maybe you still have 20, who knows? But after abandon 10, after 30, they really has shown their sincerity. So we start to trust them to some extent. US trusts UK. UK trusts France. China, Soviet Union used to trust, but later on they have difficulty. Now our leader is building new trust, probably better than Stalin, Mao Zedong trust this time. But we are not perfectly trusting each other, but more or less trust because we have no border issue. Then Russia may tell our leader, do you need some missile defense? We can help. If we have missile defense, then we would be more or less on a par with the US on strategic balancing between offense and defense. If Russia can help us, Russia is our real friend. And that may make China to commit more to Russia's national interest. I doubt Russia would not give us this. But if they can give, I do appreciate the level of strategic trust that the 2 sides have built since Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin's time. This is the highest. Not perfect, but the highest. So draft a program for North Korea to be willing to abandon something, to still have a room to lie. Not to let them to have no room to lie. And over time, they build a trust. City-to-city exchange, school-to-school exchange, sportsman to sportsman, musician to musician exchange. then there are people would feel America are not a war monster. They are normal people. There are some bad people, but some normal people. Now through their education, brainwash, they think all American people are crazy people. I used to think Americans this way during Cultural Revolution. Through our brainwash, we need to open their city to invite their people to live in the U.S. host family, to spend a year, to do school exchange. Why U.S. cannot do it? So this way, I think North Korea would not remove all its threat to us, but would more or less significantly reduce its current physical level of threat. Threat means the capability to threat at times, the intent to threat. When they still have some lingering capability, but they have far less intent, the overall threat would be much reduced. In the same way, could China-US talk if some US people would shoot a missile without authorization? This is a local missile officer, or they shoot without intent, but they shoot. How China-US can create a system? Their leader can call our leader. This is a bad missile. Please shoot it. It's not my real intent. We should build such a kind of system.
Thank you. So, Dingli.
Thank you very much. Through all this, I think we still have hope. I'm not thinking we ran out of hope.
Thank you. So, Ambassador Satoh, so let me remind you that you got two questions. Actually, one question from Anton that is about the role of Japan in arms control. And also, actually, Brad somewhat posed that question on the sort of strategic stability. And so that means what is the important elements of the credibility of extended deterrence? So, thank you.
Thank you. Well, Anton, your question reminded me of an event I attended more than 10 years ago in Paris. That was at a conference to launch the so-called Global Zero. And I was invited to speak as one of the keynote speakers. And I characterized my talk then as the call from the goal. In the context of the Global Zero of nuclear weapons, we are already standing in the goal. Therefore, I said my speech is a call from the goal to those who are still having nuclear weapons. And to your question, I would like to repeat what I said at that time. For Japan has capabilities, technological, financial, and all other capabilities to develop and equip, develop nuclear weapons and equip ourselves with nuclear weapons. But because of our own historical memories, we are the only country which suffered from a nuclear explosions. So, reflecting the public opinion, we made it a sort of a national policy, not to possess nuclear weapons, not to produce them, and not to allow their introduction into the country. In Paris, I wanted to appeal to those that for Japan, with such capabilities, is committed to the so-called three non-nuclear principles. That itself is a great contribution to the cause of reduction or abrogation of nuclear weapons. And it's easy for those who have something to reduce to say, we are going to reduce something. We don't have anything to reduce insofar as nuclear weapons are concerned. It's for Japan to firmly commit to this non-nuclear policy is the largest contribution which Japan has been doing to the cause of the nuclear banning. And again, we need US extended deterrence for the security of the country which are determined not to have nuclear weapons. Because we are surrounded by nuclear powers, and also North Korea is developing nuclear weapons. And I remember about 10 years ago or so, some pundits speculated, foreign pundits speculated that Japan would move into the direction of possessing nuclear weapons when faced with the real challenge from North Korea. And history tells that we have not done that because public anti-nuclear sentiment is so strong. So I hope that you would appreciate that for our commitment to the 3 non-nuclear principles is the contribution. I will not say the greatest contribution, but it's a very significant contribution to the cause of the nuclear reduction or annihilation of, this elimination of nuclear weapons. And also, as part of our efforts to ensure, we have to convince ourselves of the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. And also, we have to engage the United States in efforts to defend Japan. Therefore, to strengthen our defense cooperation with the United States is a tangible means for us to ensure that capability, including the missile defense. And every time I read some newspaper reports that Moscow was worried about missile defense. I can't understand why you are worried about it, because our missile defense is aimed at North Korean missiles. And after all, if Russia, the aim is to strengthen its own deterrence capabilities, missile defense would not, disturb your deterrence. So this is my way of thinking.
Thank you.
Say one more thing about this stuff. Time's up.
Maybe if you could speak at the wrap-up, the statement.
Okay.
Thank you. So now I know, I recognize faces who are saying, I want to talk. So now it's a discussion session. But please be reminded, this is not the location for your speech, but maybe a comment and a question. So I would urge you to, make your remarks as short as possible so that we can finish our session by 6 o'clock sharp. Otherwise, I'll be killed by my colleagues at JIIA. So please raise your hand, and if you sort of designate, then identify yourself, and then wait until the microphone arrives. So, yes.
Okay. I'm Martin William, Geopolis Energy. How does, if we were to see a technology race in technologies like artificial intelligence, other autonomous systems related technologies, instead of a traditional arms race, how would that affect, in your view, the concept of strategic stability and the kinds of arms control issues you've been discussing?
Thank you. So the question to anybody?
It could be anybody. Yeah.
Right. So who can volunteer? Okay.
Happy to start because it's all conjecture. So I'll conjecture first. The nightmare scenario, of course, is that in a conflictual relationship, one side builds a strategic force that's all AI enabled, capable of fully autonomous operation, and then we find ourselves in crisis. And then the machines take over and we have escalation that nobody would have chosen. That's the nightmare scenario. I recently convened a workshop on this topic and brought in, my center is not far from Silicon Valley, so I brought in some Silicon Valley specialists on AI, and they said to the community that worries about this, this is what we think you're thinking of when you talk about this. And they showed a picture of the Death Star from Star Wars. You know, that AI is just around the corner. And we're going to have something, a completely new way of war because of AI. And the follow-on PowerPoint slide they used was of the Google test, which is trying to teach the computer to recognize school buses, which are bright yellow in the United States, but they have difficulty distinguishing them from chickens, yellow chickens. That's the reality of AI today. So there may be a terrible problem of strategic stability that comes with the competitive military pursuit of artificial intelligence. But it is a problem that we have some time to study and think about and avoid.
And also, let me add one thing. Even though I think the military is not going to use AI for decision making, particularly in the nuclear crisis management, but maybe if there is a kind of suspicion that the other side may use it, that also may affect the consideration, the rationality. That's one. The other is probably AI will help to accelerate the decision time, particularly in combination with the ISR technology. But that means if you have a much shorter time for the decision making, there will be a much more risk for the making mistakes in judging. So that's also another risk that in my understanding as well. So thank you. Who is going to speak? Masa.
Thank you very much for such a great panel. I have one meticulous question regarding the potentiality of the Chinese having an early warning system. Early warning system means the launch on order sometimes in the future. So if China, I want to ask you, Dr. Shen, China is really willing to have a capability of the early warning? That's my question, number one. Also, same question to Mr. Roberts, Dr. Roberts. If China have this type of capability, early warning capability, which means applicable to a launch on order, what might be an influence on the strategic stability in this region and also between two nations, China and the United States? That's my question. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Masahota from Kyodo News.
So nice to see you again.
Yeah, this is always.
As mentioned, I do not represent Chinese government, so don't take my word serious. Any country wants to have security. Security is oxygen. But what constitutes security? You have to identify threat emerging on the horizon. What makes you to do it? Early warning system. So I think China, if I were Chinese leader, I need early warning. And every country wants to have their early warning. No country would say, I want to wait to see when the emerging threat to become reality. Nobody wants to see this. But then there will be an arms race of early warning. But this is a good arms race. It's a defensive race. Major countries like the US, Russia, and possibly at a future time, Japan, should donate their defensive system for the peaceful use of the entire planet. So let's build a global early warning. So every country can see clearly which country is threatening what other country. So such kind of fight trajectory would be visible on internet. And this imagery collecting satellite or beyond the horizon radar would be available for free. America should not only do it for America, and Russia does it for Russia. We should spend money for the entire world. No one has the right to attack other country out of surprise. And any country has a right to retaliate against a first strike. In order for any first strike not to be first strike, at least not to be successful, early warning and a matching interception capability would be a necessary tool. But how to make other countries not to overdevelop their system? That would generate a dilemma, a Thucydides trap of ABM. That would entail the entire global village to think, not to build a national defense, but to build a planet defense.
Briefly, I would add that in general, the view of the United States for 30 years has been that China's modernization of its nuclear forces and development of all of the attributes of a modern force was necessary. We weren't happy to see China go from 20 ICBMs to however many they have today to double that number a decade from now. We weren't happy to see China go from a monad, meaning just one delivery system, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, to a triad, now with submarines and bombers. There are things, but our general philosophy has been laissez-faire. Let it be, because China needs to have confidence in its deterrent. This has been a somewhat troubling posture from Japan's perspective, because it implies that the United States accepts mutual vulnerability with China and therefore will agree to be deterred at a time of crisis in which China might try to press some advantage. Our principal concern today is that the nuclear force in China's future may enable China to pursue different nuclear policies from the ones it has today. No first use implies that you absorb the first blow. The doctrine of the Chinese rocket force is absorb the first blow and then retaliate. When it has the ability to go first, that will worry us more. Will it choose to go first? I don't think ever. But it is changing something important in the relationship. May I address one other question that came my way, which was about the man in Ohio? The division in American politics today, very, very briefly. We heard about the man in Ohio this morning. We're all, of course, engaged in endless discussions about Donald Trump and the future of American politics, and we all wish we knew the answer. A contrary data point to the one Averill made this morning is the analysis done by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. The Chicago Council has, for almost 50 years, every other year, conducted an analysis of American public opinion and American leadership opinion on the American role in the world. And their latest study came out earlier this year. It's available on the web. And what it shows is that the American public support for American international engagement is at an all-time high. In the history, the 50-year history of these polls, that the American public support for U.S. allies and alliances is at an all-time high, and the American public's willingness to expend blood and treasure in support of its commitment to others is at an all-time high. So the man in the street isn't the majority, but the man in Ohio isn't the new majority, but it's a new factor, and we all know how politics works. People can be led. And if we have leaders who tell the people, you have reason to be outraged, now be outraged, well, they're going to be outraged.
So, any other? So, we got two.
Thank you very much. My name is Masako Ikegami, Tokyo Institute of Technology. I'm a humble academic. My question is now addressed to Dr. Roberts, a kind of follow-up to your comments right now that the United States in the past 30 years, in a way, the China's nuclear build-up was regarded as something necessary. And then my question is, if so, why couldn't the United States say the same words to North Korea? Well, this is a bit, let me put it this way. In my interpretation, North Korea is simply following the course of China. Pyongyang has seen how China has been respected and treated as a great power since its first nuclear test. So therefore, Pyongyang thinks that, okay, once we have nuclear weapons, we will also be respected. So if the United States have such kind of such an attitude towards China's nuclear forces, then I think we are in trouble because we can't really expect a kind of seriousness. To be honest, Mr. Trump and Kim Jong-un's summits look like all endless just show. I don't see any seriousness in their talks, and this is a very serious issue indeed from the Japanese point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Tsuyoshi, I think if you could.
Thank you very much. My name is Tsuyoshi Gorok. I'm a lecturer at the Nishōgakushu University. My question is go to the Dr. Khlopkov. My question is very simple. How do you see from a Russian perspective, how do you assess the Chinese nuclear capability or nuclear missile capability? That's the question. And another question to the Dr. Roberts. As you know that recently the cooperation between the China and Russia is increasing, especially in this region. How does this cooperation impact the strategic calculation of the U.S. nuclear deterrence, or maybe the strategic stability vis-a-vis the China and also vis-a-vis Russia?
Thank you. So now it's time to wrap up. So if each of you could respond, and also Ambassador Satoh and Dingli, and if you could have a sort of final words in 90 seconds, that would be nice. Thank you.
I will try to be brief. China is very much advanced, but Russian governmental officials do not see its nuclear capability as a threat to Russia nowadays. And Soviet-China nuclear cooperation was quite deep in, I think, in 50s. And as it was publicly mentioned recently, even there are some discussions on early warning system cooperation. It was mentioned by President Putin recently. So this is, I think, the sign how Russian officials see the Chinese nuclear capability nowadays. And quickly, I would like to react to comparison between China and DPRK. From legal point of view, China is NPT member as a nuclear weapon state. DPRK joined as non-nuclear weapon state. So from that point of view, I think there is a big difference from non-proliferation point of view, and we should keep it in mind because NPT is quite a cornerstone of the whole regime.
Two excellent questions. Thank you. And Anton's made an important first point on yours. We have 4 American presidents in a row who have thought this way. And it follows from and let me say, the American presidents of the 1960s weren't all that happy about the prospect of Mao getting the bomb. And you can, in fact, read the national intelligence estimates that were done in the 1960s of the Chinese nuclear program. Mounting anxiety, 1961, 62, 63, fear that Mao would get the bomb and use the bomb to export the revolution. And then 5 years of head-scratching by the CIA. What happened? He used the bomb to safeguard the revolution, not extend it. And I think, in general, the U.S. nuclear strategy community came to see China as essentially as what it says it is, a country committed to nuclear minimalism, no first use, and the use of its nuclear weapons only in extreme circumstances when it's been directly attacked. In essence, a conservative country from the perspective of the employment of military force. We can say none of those things confidently about the leaders of North Korea. If the purpose of North Korea acquiring nuclear weapons is the purpose you've attributed to them, the United States would find that easier to accept. But there's a major uncertainty set in place by the decades of provocations of one kind or another. And the clear commitment to a not conservative purpose, but a revisionist purpose on the peninsula to achieve an outcome politically that's different from the one on the peninsula today. And so we see their acquisition of capabilities that could deter us as creating an unstable situation in which they feel they can initiate war because they can blackmail us out and win and make a different status quo on the peninsula. On the China-Russia question, I would just point to one dimension of a complex topic in the interest of time, and that is, please take note of the fact that in American military planning, we have given up on our long commitment to the two-war force sizing construct. For decades, we maintained the ability to fight two wars simultaneously, regional wars, not all-out major global war, but two regional wars. Effectively today, we only have a one-war strategy. This makes China-Russia strategic cooperation highly salient from the perspective of our deterrence strategy. And I could spell that out, but in the interest of time, I won't. Thank you.
During the Second World War, the U.S. Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, used to say, take pragmatic steps with an idealistic objective. We should have a good objective, but do small, constructive, healthy, trust-building efforts. Take action. Don't blame each other. Learn to understand, respect, and appreciate each other. I think we can rebuild the culture of cooperative threat reduction, not only between U.S. and the Soviet Union, but also between China and U.S., between Russia and the U.S., etc.
On strategic stability, I just want to point out what I said at the outset, that the differences between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. U.S.-Russia strategic stability can be, if I'm not mistaken, can be measured largely by the nuclear force balance. But U.S.-China strategic balance can't be measured by that, because nuclear weapons are not central importance. And the Chinese challenges to the United States is taking place in many dimensions. So when we are talking about strategic stability, we had better be careful not to seek the same connotation in both two relations between the U.S. and Russia and the U.S. and China.
Thank you very much. So thanks to your cooperation, we are able to finish the session on time. And of course, the issues are so diverse and many are still outstanding. So I think it seems that we are required to do very hard brain work in the future. And also probably we have a diplomacy, dialogue, diplomacy, and possibly some sort of maybe deterrence efforts as well. So with this, I'm not going to sum up, but just would like to thank all excellent panelists, and please join me thanking them. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Housekeeping announcement from the Secretariat. Right after the closing from 1810, we have the essay contest award presentation ceremony, and from 1840, we will hear from Prime Minister Abe in the room next door, the room Ho-Oh, where the plenary session took place. Due to the breakout session, the room is smaller than the morning, and therefore you may not be able to find out seats. So in that case, we have a monitor screen that can be used for watching his speech. And also, those of you who have the name tag with red thread as well as yellow, please come up to the stage. I ask for your cooperation. Thank you.